I'm really excited to introduce our speaker. Kim Clark is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Communications speaker and consultant. Now, after stints running employee communications at PayPal, GoDaddy, and GitHub, she also has released a documentary and lectured on media theory and production at San Jose State University. Kim is very dedicated to teaching, consulting, and coaching people. Oops, so sorry, y'all. I just moved, so I don't have your bio in front of me. There we go. Sorry, I had like a tremor in my mouse hand. So Kim is very passionate about coaching people about consciousness in their communications. And so as a DEI communications consultant, she helps content creators and people managers understand that if we aren't conscious in our communications, we're probably causing unintentional harm to people. Now, she's co-authoring the book, The Conscious Communicator, The Fine Art of Not Saying Stupid Shit. Kim, I can't relate to that title hard enough. I love it. That's going to get released in summer of 22. And Kim believes that no matter how inclusive a company may desire to be, microaggressions will undermine belonging, and we all have to learn to deal with them head on. Now, Kim, I'm really, really, really excited to dig in on the subject with you. But before we do, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience, something that they should know about your background, or maybe a baseline of where we're going to start with today's conversation?
That was an incredible introduction. Thank you for setting this up. Is it possible that I can share some slides?
Yes, I just gave you screen sharing permission, so you should be able to do that.
Okay, you set me up with some great questions. So I put together some slides so we can have some visuals for the different style of learners and stuff, but I left some room for us to have a conversation and for us to take questions at the end.
Yeah, for sure. So
I am really grateful for this opportunity to have this conversation with you all on International Women's Day. I mean, what an honor. What an honor. Thank you, Power to Fly, that I get to talk on International Women's Day. You're going to see a theme through the whole talk with Meg and I. So Meg, I'm going to throw out some questions here and there during the conversation. And I really hope it sparks conversation amongst those who are watching and listening. I'm asking you to participate. Have a whole conversation in the chat without me. Just share. This is a great opportunity for us to share our stories and raise more awareness about our personal experiences in our professional environments. Today, I just want to cover some of the main things that Meg really wanted to make sure that I hit in this conversation. That's identifying what microaggressions are and the impact that they have on us and on other people. And then unlearning those limiting thoughts around microaggressions, trying not to get defensive when we say one, that kind of thing. And what are our options? It seems like our options are limited, but actually we have additional options. And then learning how to be effective in the way that we speak up around our microaggressions. So first and foremost, somebody needs to hear this. I need to hear this. It's not you. Meg, there's nothing that you did to receive, to earn that microaggression. There's no victim blaming here, right? It's not you. And as Michael Beckwith talks about, what you say about me says more about your consciousness than my character. Now, I first learned about this. I know, heat, right? So another place that you can go to learn about this is the 4 agreements. Now, that has nothing to do directly with DEI and microaggressions, but there's an agreement that says don't take things personally. And that's because people are projecting their life experience as limited or as expansive as it is. They are projecting their life experience onto you through their eyes. So that's what we need to understand. This sounds like a you problem was one of my favorite things to say sometimes when the situation calls for it. But, I just want everyone to understand that you didn't earn anything. If you're getting microaggressions about your hair, about your looks, about your intelligence, about your car, whatever it may be, it's not you. So we are in the midst of the Great Resignation, or as some people are calling it, the Great Employee Reevaluation. Like, what do I want in my life? And who do I want to be around? And who do I want to spend the most time with? Right? And typically we don't choose a bunch of jerks, right? So there's a lot of exodus that's happening. an HBR article recently talked about how people can't and won't tolerate mistreatment, injustice, and incompetence at the expense of our dignity and values. We're not doing it anymore. It's over. It's done. Now, there's a whole bunch of people that got to catch up on that memo. But here today, if you're with me and you're talking, Meg gets it. The memo is out. The declaration is made. It's over.
Just because you had to pay your dues does not mean this is an immutable, unchangeable, structure that everyone has to go through. We created these systems, we can change them.
That's right. And we've allowed an awful lot. My mom's generation, and she went through the workforce. My mom went through a lot of crap. My grandma went through a lot of crap. And now I'm looking at my daughter and saying, less crap for her. Right? Like, what can I do to stop? And that's through education. That's what I love to do, is to teach. I love to do trainings. I love to do sessions. I just want to teach, and I want to have these conversations so we can get things out of the darkness. So we make things more visible. Now, I come from, as Meg talked about, internal communications, employee communications. That's been a large part of my career. I understand that language leads to behavior, and that visibility drives accountability. As communicators, as content creators, and all of us are, we are the ones that we can bring forth more visibility, which will drive more accountability. Now, something that we really need to understand also about the time that we're in is that employees who've been marginalized over the decades or even to the last few years, not so hot to go back to the office. And here's just one example. 3% of Black professionals want to go back to the office full time. That's 97% saying, no, thank you. I mean, Meg, I don't know about you, but I have done articles on this. I've done interviews on this, but it's just astounding to me that people are vocalizing, no, thank you. Right? And why is that? One major reason is because of microaggressions and discrimination in the office, because they feel like they got a code switch, which is adjusting the way one talks, looks, behaves to try to fit in. So the assimilation, the responsibility has been on us to try to get into a workplace that was never designed for us. Okay, so we've got to change the design of the workplace, because we were not part of the picture when the original corporate culture was created.
Oh yeah, we weren't even like an afterthought. It was just, this is something for all of these people, and y'all can figure it out later.
Yeah, and then when we start entering into the workforce, we're the ones that have to do all the compromising, all the assimilation. The burden is on us in order to meet certain criteria. So we're not doing that anymore. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is the next business transformation. It is happening right now. We're not going back. So it has to be embedded across the business. And so we have to understand that the genie is out of the bottle, right? So what are these microaggressions that are causing people to make life-altering and career-altering decisions? So here's the definition. Everyday, verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which is most of the time, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to targeted persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership, because I'm a woman, because I'm gay, because I have an invisible disability, whatever it may be. And it's rooted in stereotypes. Remember what I said earlier, it's about projecting. It's about people seeing how they see you through their limited lens and limited life experience. And it feels like many paper cuts. And it's like that heavy psychic weight, that knapsack that Peggy McIntosh talks about. So how do you know? How do you know if a microaggression is said? Because sometimes you're sitting in a meeting, something is said, and you're like, that didn't sound quite right, right? Sometimes you're just like, did that just happen? Did y'all just
so
hear
many
that?
times, like, you don't have anybody to like give the facial expression to. You don't have anybody to look at and be like, are you also hearing that? Like, this is even more damaging when you are the only whatever, pick an adjective or pick a descriptor. But if you are the only in a room, it's very easy to think like, no, nobody else seemed upset by that. So it's okay, I guess. I shouldn't make a fuss.
Right, exactly. So again, the burden is, the social pressure is put back on us to deal with it. Now that we've become used to it, for those of us who've been in the workplace for quite a while. So how do you know? It just feels gross. This was really just the best way I could describe it. It's just what it comes down to. I love that. It just
I absolutely love that. It very much reminds me of, what was it? There was a Supreme Court case when they were trying to define pornography. It's like, well, I can't tell you what it is, but you know it when you see it. It's one of those same things. Like, did that just feel kind of ick to you? Because I got a big wave of ick.
Ick factor. Absolutely. So here's some examples. And I had some on a previous slide. Take a look. See which ones in the chat. Talk about ones either from this list or share an experience that you've had where you've either witnessed a microaggression or you've been the recipient of a microaggression. And Meg, do you have an example?
Do I have an example? Does anyone not have an example? Let's see. I've had everything from assumptions that I don't need to be paid as much because I had a husband, so clearly he was going to take care of me. Even less, let's see, on a smaller scale. I was a paralegal for like 6 years, and I would be coming into a conference or something, and it was assumed that I was the secretary and I was going to get everybody coffee. Mm-hmm. And that even happened after I was, after a paralegal, and I was the head of purchasing for a manufacturing company. I come into a meeting with a new vendor, and that's how I was greeted.
Wow. How did you handle it?
Guess who I didn't go with for our vendor services? No, I looked at, I honestly, I wish I had handled it better at the time. I'm not one of those people that's very glib, especially if it's like a conflict kind of thing. I tend to like stand back, but it was one of those things where I just looked at him and I was like, actually, the coffee's just out in the hall. You can go get yourself, whatever you need. And then when you're done, we can have this conversation. But I really wish in the moment I've been able to be like, so why do you think that why do you think that I should be the one that gets you coffee? And why do you think a secretary is the person that should get you coffee?
Yeah. If you're able-bodied,
there's
a high chance you can get it yourself.
Well, and I'm also fully aware of the fact that like I sit in a lot of privilege, a lot. I'm a very resourced person, and a lot of people are not. A lot of people don't have the ability to even say anything when these things happen. Mm-hmm. I'm keeping my eye on the chat here to see what other people are talking about when they're, some microaggressions that they have, that they've witnessed as well. So please feel free to share those with us there. Kim, what about you? What's one that comes to mind for you when you think of microaggressions?
My early career, I was in a lot of male-dominated areas. I worked in rock radio. That's just walking into it. And then,
talk about gatekeeping central, dear Lord.
Yeah. And also video production. I did a lot of documentary filmmaking. And the one that stands out the most happened at one of the rock radio stations that I worked in, and I was in promotions and marketing. And somebody just, one of the salespeople who had the biggest mouths that felt like they could say whatever, because they're the ones making all oodles of money and have the fancy cars and stuff. So they're kind of above the law. So, one time I was in a meeting and the salesperson just looked over him and said, "Wow, you have an amazing rack." Referring to my chesticles area. And I was 25, right? And just in shock, obviously in shock. And there were people, and we could talk about this during the Q&A, but there were people that were higher than me in the room. Nobody said anything. I just sat there stunned, like literally like froze. I think that's when I started that coping mechanism. Typically people will do fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. I tend to go towards the freeze section. Yeah. And then it's later, but I didn't have the tools then that I do now, which we're going to talk about, on how the variety of options that we have to handle those situations. So that doesn't happen to you like what happened to me, just freezing in the moment. Right.
I'm looking at the chat here and it's blowing up. There's so many people. Let's see. Rhonda identifies with the entire left side of the menu. So My apologies, Rhonda. I wish better for you and for everyone. Heather said taking credit for ideas. Rosalind had people ask, where are you really from? Putera said you speak English really well. That's another one.
Yes.
See, told that you wouldn't have the job if not for affirmative action. People assume that you're Mexican just because you are Latinx, Hispanic, something around that area, and they just assume.
Yeah.
Speaking over people. Yolanda says you don't look like a lawyer. That one, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember learning in law school from professors that there were going to be situations where I would be expected to come to court in a skirt because it's not professional for a woman to wear pants in a courtroom. Might I remind you, this was in the early 2000s. This was not 1817 that this happened.
Not that long ago.
It's total BS. Oh my gosh, yes. Leslie had one saying, "You're so articulate. You're so well spoken."
Yeah.
And I've heard people say this in a way that they don't think it's a microaggression, but you don't get to tell people what they're offended by, right?
Right. Well, there's two parts to it. The offense is in the eye of the offended, and it's the impact. There's a whole thing around intent versus impact, and that I don't have time to get into deeply, but I do address it somewhat towards the end here. But it's the impact we have to take responsibility for. But offense is in the eye of the offended. Now, we get the criticism around like, oh, you just need to have tougher skin. You just need to toughen up. No, actually, I don't. I deserve to be respected in the workplace. So how about you not be so defensive when I ask you to rethink of what you just said to me? How about you can have some thicker skin too? We can both do it. How about that? But ultimately what it comes down to is respect. This is about respecting the human dignity of your colleagues and not creating that separation, that power over, that dynamics that is so prevalent in the workplace today, because language leads to behavior, like I mentioned. So thank you for sharing in the chat. That's a big deal. It's vulnerable of you. And it's important to share your story so people know that it happens and they're not alone. Oh yeah.
I mean, and it happens. I feel like it's one of those things where, so like, I can only speak from my position, right? My lived experience. I am a white, lower middle class, cisgender, heteronormative, neuroatypical person, right? And there's stuff coming up in this chat that are things that would have absolutely shattered me. And I am still know that I am from a position of privilege or position of resources. So you can I can only imagine how detrimental and just horrific it would be to be faced with these in isolation, let alone multiples of these throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your career. All right, so I want to take a step back. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm jumping in a lot, and this is your time to talk. So let me take a step back.
Okay, couple of things. We were talking about the dress code with the skirt kind of a thing. Okay, the skirt has nothing to do with you being able to do your job. Okay, so there's a great article by the Stanford Innovation Review called "The Bias of Professionalism." So if somebody finds it, put it in the chat. The bias of professionalism. And dress codes is one of those things, to talk about. There's so much to say on this. All right, let me keep going. All right. So the thing is that some of us may be working at employers that are like, we believe in inclusion. We want an inclusive culture. However, if there is no education, training, support, and then accountability around microaggressions in particular, then it is counterproductive. It is in cross purposes, and it will undermine this effort for an inclusive culture. So take a look at what Deloitte found around the number of, even breaking it down between different marginalized populations, the number of instances, the number of people within an employee population that are experiencing bias and microaggressions. I mean, this is astronomical. This is unacceptable. Okay, so the question doesn't always become to our companies of like, you're doing all this effort around our inclusive culture, wanting to foster inclusivity in our culture. Thank you for that. There's a more contribute aspect to that. But let's take a step back, let's take a time out and say, what are we not going to tolerate anymore? What are the consequences? What are we doing for managers to help them understand the kind of language that they're using with their teams and with their employees that are actually microaggressive? Now, you were talking about the cumulative effect, even in the same day, for the even more intersectional and marginalized identities in the workplace. Okay, there's a kind of funny video out there called Microaggressions Are Like Mosquito Bites. Okay, disclaimer, it has swear words in it. That doesn't bother me, but I just want to, just disclaimer. So microaggressions are like mosquito bites. And if you're not familiar with the experience of someone who has intersectional marginalized identities, please watch this really short animated video to help understand beyond your own limited experience what it's like for somebody else in the same workplace, in the same team that you're in. Now, we were talking about marginalized identities, if you're the only, and how, like, sometimes how frustrating that can be, how lonely that can be. And that's where allies come in. That's where accomplices come in. That's where us, that's why those of us are just like learning more about microaggressions. So when we hear them, something can be done. All right, let me talk more about the impact of microaggression. So we have it at a cultural level, and this is what happens to the individuals. We can start to, go down in our performance, because the psychological impact of these microaggressions, it ebbs at your confidence. You definitely don't feel like you belong. You're always trying to have to prove yourself. I mean, there's research and data that talks about this overcompensation, the additional degrees, the farther that you have to work in order to get half as far as somebody else. That's exhausting. And it's psychically wearing. And if you're in the office again, or if you're back home, it's emotional. You take it home with you. You take you wherever you go. And if you have the kind of day where you're called hun and sweetie, and wow, you're really pretty for a transgender girl, like these kinds of comments, yes, you can be tougher about it. Yes, you can be stronger about it, but you're not the cause. So we have to we have to work into this so we don't have our colleagues or ourselves go through all of these different kinds of things that are all very real experiences for people, especially those who have accumulated microaggressions, anxiety, depression, lower self-esteem. And it prohibits us from thinking that we can move ahead, that we're going to get anywhere. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Striving for promotions, microaggressions and bias absolutely plays a part in that. That's somebody else's perception projecting onto us, right? So one of the main options that a lot of us have when we receive microaggressions or that we witness microaggressions is staying silent. And there's a lot of positives and benefits to that. And it's also quite exhausting and hard, and it doesn't fix the situation. But maybe I'm not the one that's supposed to fix the situation. But some way, somehow, the situation needs to be addressed, because we're going to be maturing up in our workplaces around our language. We're going to take more responsibility for what comes out of our mouths. And the bias, if you have a brain, you have bias, not just jerks, right? Just if you have a brain, you have bias. And so it's not about eliminating the unconscious bias. That's there. And so it's what we do with it. Are we going to weaponize it? Are we going to let it go through without thought and conscientious awareness of what we're thinking? Are we getting curious about that bias of like, why am I thinking that this brown-skinned person is here to clean the kitchen in the break room? What is that about? Because that's all about me, has nothing to do with that person. That's maturing up around our language and disrupting our own bias. So we can also swing the pendulum all the way to the other way by calling people out. Blame and shame does not help growing. It doesn't help with the lessons learned. Now, there are absolutely appropriate situations when a person needs to be called out, like, you need to leave this meeting right now. That was offensive. It's rude. You need to leave this meeting. Now, there are times and places when that is absolutely appropriate, but we tend to go either this extreme of not saying anything or this other extreme of calling people out when there is actually more opportunity in the middle by calling people in. This is work by Loretta J. Ross and her colleagues. And I'll talk more about that it specifically. But if there is somebody that has earned some trust with you, that has shown that they want to do better, they may have been afraid of what they say or saying the wrong thing, and then they slip up, but you know who they are, and it's a relationship that you want to recover and repair, then calling in is an option. And again, it doesn't always have to be you, the recipient of the microaggression, to address the situation. We have other options with allies, colleagues, the person's manager. I'll talk more about that in just a second. So it's not always up to you. I just want to be really clear on that. Sometimes you're not the right person because that person that gave you the microaggression or said the microaggression may not listen to you, may not respect you, hence the microaggression. So it needs to be somebody else who has some leverage to get that person's attention, to change their behavior and change their language leading to that behavior. So calling in, here are some options. If you are the one, and if you feel like you're in a position that, somebody says, you don't look like a lawyer, ask, we'll do that. Meg, let's do a little role play here. So, you don't look like a lawyer. You can pick one of these.
My favorite that my mother has ingrained in me is to ask a question. So if somebody were to tell me like, well, you don't look like a lawyer. Oh, really? Okay. So what does a lawyer look like to you? That's interesting. How don't I fit? And you can say it and be bubbling, and then they have to explain why they're being a jerk.
And then again, that is putting the responsibility back on them. They've created the situation. You do not have to respond to that situation. You can just give it back. Martin Luther King Jr. was spit on. He takes out his handkerchief, wipes it off his suit, hands it to the person who spit on him and said, I believe this belongs to you. So remember that, that visual.
Oh, that's a power move right there. I'm loving that.
Right. So that kind of visceral visual helps me remember in a triggered traumatic situation, like what can I do in this situation to regain control, that I'm not at the mercy of somebody else's, lack of information or whatever it may be. So putting the question back on them, what was that? Pardon me. Or, oh, that's interesting. What does a lawyer look like to you? Because I am a lawyer, so that's not what's on the table here. But what does a lawyer look like to you? And they, getting people to hear themselves, right? Or seeking clarity. Tell me about that's something we talked about here. I'll offer an alternative perspective. If you ever considered that a lawyer could be a woman and could look like me with my really cool hair.
Thank you.
I recently learned that, that kind of comment is actually quite sexist. Here's an article, or here's what I've learned. Well, we don't agree that, that what I look like may not look like a lawyer, but what we can agree on is that lawyers can look like me and everybody else. There's just ways that you can turn it around and then give yourself, you might be really, really triggered. Can we just pause on this conversation, and then also setting those boundaries. And this is really, really important, teaching people how to treat us. And it's just not just in microaggressions, but this is in performance review and giving us access to projects. It's in all of it, teaching people how to treat us. Please do not say that I do not look a lawyer, again, around me, or to me. It's not appropriate. And end the conversation, leave it there. So this is, so I really, really encourage people to check out Professor Loretta J. Ross. She is a professor out of Smith, and her work is calling in, and she has multiple online classes and events that she does. And I really highly recommend that y'all continue to study these different ways. So you have these tools in your tool belt, and you realize that you have options. And so it's not like we walk around expecting it. Some of us may, but, I often get caught off guard and surprised. And that's kind of part of the magic. That's kind of part of the point of microaggressions, is to catch people off guard and surprise them when they aren't meant to be compliments anyway. And so so we're not left on our heels. We have these tools and we practice them, and we are surrounded by people who also use them, so we can learn all the different ways that we have to use. So when you see something, do something. And this is for the other people in the room that may hear or see that Meg is getting interrupted again by not just men. I don't want to default to the bias of men interrupting women, for example. I could be in a meeting with Meg and I'm just interrupting her left and right. Somebody needs to stop me, because clearly I'm not reading the room. Right?
Yeah.
And if it's a relationship with me that you want to repair and recover, and you know where my heart is, then you taking the time to say something to me is an honor to me. It shows that you respect our relationship. And I will realize that I need to do the work moving forward. It's not always up to you to referee what I say, right? So here are some options. So addressing the person who said the microaggression, you can allow space for reconciliation and learning if that's an option. And like I said, it can be exhausting. So choose your battles. But something needs to be said or done at some point by someone. And this is that opportunity for allies. So at the bottom, you're going to see that I recommend signing up for free bystander intervention trainings that are hosted by what used to be called Hollaback, a nonprofit organization. It is now called Right to Be. This is where they will give you tools and language to help. Meg, do you remember that situation where there was a Black woman who was buying panties from Victoria's Secret, and a white woman came up and tried to hit her? And then it was all caught on video. And the white woman ended up on the floor, kind of in some sort of a panic attack situation. Meanwhile, people are just buying their stuff and leaving, walking around the woman.
Because nobody wants to get involved.
Yeah, nobody wants to get involved in stuff. So in that situation, if I were there, whenever I come across these situations, I always think, what would I have done if I was there? So if ever you come across these articles or videos, I want you to practice this. You got to keep this fresh. What would you do if you were there and saw whatever happened? What would you do? So the appropriate situation, the appropriate move for me, considering, my white skin especially, is to walk up to the woman who's recording, who was going to buy the panties, the Black woman, and say, how can I help? Or can I help? So I'm not going to jump in as the savior. I'm not going to jump in as the hero. Okay. The best thing that I can do. So this is about the impacted. This is about the woman who was just trying to buy a pair of panties at Victoria's Secret with her coupon. That's all that was happening. She did nothing to deserve the treatment, of course, right? Yeah. So there's drama going on and all this kind of stuff. So you go directly to the person that's impacted and say, how can I help? Is there anything I can do to help?
Are you okay? Do you need help?
Okay?
Yes. What do you need?
Yes, exactly. So they get to dictate what happens from there. Okay, so it's about them. It's not about you saving the day or anything like that.
If that's what you're going for, then I recommend you don't stand up.
Yeah, just please go to the break room again. Check yourself. Yeah. So, but if it happens to you, hopefully somebody is checking on you. And if not, go to someone who is safe to talk to. But it needs to be talked about. Somebody of leverage or relationship to the person who said it, somebody needs to address it with the person who said it. So there's an opportunity to learn. And if it becomes a pattern, then that's when HR gets, called in, right? And I have heard from many women who have said, I've just repeatedly called X, Y, and Z by this particular team member, and that person was eventually removed. So that's why we got to do education, support to give them a chance to change. But then there's the accountability, especially through manager expectations. People come to the company because they love the company, but they leave a manager. And a lot of it can be traced to, bias in language behavior. Okay, so what's interesting is there's a Survey Monkey that talks about, so if you're the recipient of a microaggression, what would you actually like to have happen? Most people just want a freaking apology, a sincere apology, not just It was a joke. Meg, you're just so sensitive.
It was a joke, drives me so crazy. Like, oh, I'm sorry, this is an office, not stand-up night at the Chuckle Hut. Like, we're not here for jokes. Oh, I get so mad. So mad.
I haven't heard that one. That's good. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it is quite laughable. Sometimes we have to laugh, otherwise we're going to cry. But ultimately, well, actually, all we want is an apology. But most people don't know how to apologize sincerely because they get defensive. I'm a nice person, so I couldn't have said anything offensive. Well, you can be, and you probably are well-intentioned and a good person and loves their kids and pets their cat and gives to their church and all the things. And I can still say something offensive because it's bias. So we're figuring it out. We're learning about it together. So what if I slip up? Not if, actually, when I slip up, I need to listen and learn and follow their lead in the conversation. Meg comes to me and says, you said that thing during the meeting, you're cutting me off all the time and you took my idea. And I don't know if you're aware that you did that, but that was my experience in the meeting. And I wanted to talk about it and bring it to your attention. So I listen, I follow her lead, and I recognize that I did all of those things because the meeting was 10 minutes ago, or it was the day before. And I offer a genuine apology. I am sorry I did that. I cut you off and I took your idea. And so I can, one idea, and let me know if this works for you, is I can put together an email and say, thank you, Meg, for the awesome idea yesterday. We're going to roll with it. We're going to fund it. And I really appreciate you bringing this forward. Is there anything else I can do to learn and do better from that situation? And then she may have a couple of things like, can you also tell the rest of the team to stop interrupting me and taking my ideas? And then I say, done. And then I go and have a conversation with the team, and I circle back to Meg and say, I had a conversation with the team. We're all on notice that we need to be more aware of that bias that happens in our team meetings, and that flow is not going to happen anymore. And you can even gamify it. There's ways that you can make it light, but oftentimes microaggressions they're attacking a person's identity. It's, like I said, all of those individual challenges that people are experiencing. So it's a serious situation as well. So what not to do? Don't blame the recipient for the words that came out of your own mouth. They didn't do anything wrong. They're just doing their thing. They're trying to show up for their job. They're trying to live, be happy, right? So I got to take responsibility for what comes out of my mouth. And don't make the conversation about yourself. Well, I didn't mean anything by it, right? Instead, express gratitude for the colleagues' trust and belief that you're capable of evolving. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I can totally see that I did that. Don't overdo your apology by laying on privileged guilt. The apology should be sincere. So, that you keep apologizing. And every time I see Meg, I'm still apologizing for that thing that happened 6 months ago. And I'm buying her lunch. And I'm just like, I just feel so bad. I just feel so guilty that I did that to you. I'm so sorry. It's like, that's still centering yourself.
Yes. One more time for the people in the back.
That is still centering yourself. I'm not centering Meg in that situation and the impact that it had. She's already moved on. If it's a sincere apology, she's moved on. Now, if it's not, there's going to be some broken trust there. And it's okay after some time to still kind of reconnect and say, I realized that I cut you off left and right on Tuesday's meeting. I know it's been a week, but I was thinking back on that and that wasn't okay. And I'm sorry about that. Okay. So here's a great free resource that you can play around with called the Micropedia, the creative agency out of passion for wanting to get the word out and raise more awareness, put together this amazing database for free. Look at go to it right now, the micropedia.org, save it. Okay. Now, one of the services that I do for my clients is I write inclusive language guides. Now, that includes microaggressions. It includes intent versus impact, how to apologize sincerely, all the things that I talked about here, but much more in depth in an overall inclusive language guide. Every organization, find out if your organization has an inclusive language guide. And if they do not, they need to have one. I write custom ones. So it's for people to talk to each other, colleague to colleague, but also for content creators and communicators to make sure that we're as inclusive and as representative as possible. So we're not putting out communications and presentation decks in the all hands that have microaggressions in them, right? So we just have to learn the language that we're actually perpetuating, legacy language that we're perpetuating into the workplace that actually is causing harm to our colleagues. So with that, I just want to say thank you. Meg mentioned the book that I have coming out. I'm co-authoring this book with TED speaker Janet Stovall. And if you want to pre-order it, there's the link. And then if you want to connect, I'm posting all the time. I love sharing more and more about conscious communications, building skills. That's what we're doing right now, is that it's just about raising awareness and building skills. So with that, Meg, anything else coming up in the chat? Anything else that, we should talk about?
Tons. Yeah. So Maria is chiming in saying, I read something recently about not accepting apologies. We don't have to say that's okay.
Right.
The example was, I hear you and do not accept this apology. Maria, thank you for raising this, because this was absolutely massive for me. And I've handled this in terms of like interpersonal relationships where someone does something and they apologize. Personally, at least like what I've learned through, years of therapy and all that nonsense, is that, saying it's okay because you're trying to like move past it can sometimes very much lessen the impact of the apology. That the person hears, oh, it's okay that you did this. Where saying, somebody says they're sorry for something, thank you for that apology. You still don't have to accept it.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, that absolutely is, especially if there's a pattern of abuse from this person, not only towards you, but also with others or just towards you. I've been on the receiving end of emotional and verbal abuse over a number of years. And so I would recognize this pattern of like, say something mean, and then apologize, bring flowers, the whole thing, the cycle, right? So if, believe people when they tell you, what does Oprah say? Believe people when they show you who they are. So in those interviews, when you're interviewing people, really listen for those, the sincerity of what they say and what their leadership skills are, and meeting the team and seeing where their head is at. Talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. How inclusive is our language here at this culture? Openly ask those questions. We have to push companies into understanding this is important to us, as well as, oh yeah, and pay me the same amount as John, by the way. And make sure that, that you're not leaving anything on the table, including your own psychological safety. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Yeah. All right. So I'm going back here and looking through the chat to see what we missed. There was a lot of stuff in here about apologies. The apology is kind of the Band-Aid. That's the starting point for a lot of people. And it shouldn't be necessarily the last, the last word on it. Excellent. We have a lot of people talking about, what happens if the person who is exhibiting the microaggression is in a very advanced state of power, or inversely, the people that you are hoping can help change this don't actually have the power or the leverage that you thought they did. Kim, how would you recommend people kind of assess these situations? Like, what should you do if the microaggression is coming from the CEO of the company? That's when we, find out who needs to have a conversation with the CEO. Like who has access? Does your boss have access? Should it be the head of HR? Should it be the chief strategy officer, who is the head of the women's employee resource group, going and having a conversation with the CEO? Who has access and leverage with the CEO who is going to respect that feedback? So it doesn't have to come from you, but the CEO doesn't want to be running around. Typically, they don't want to be running around saying these things. If that's how, here's an example. When I was running internal communications at one of the tech companies, the chief technology officer, white male, he was actually relatively aware, especially around gender. And he was having a town hall, and he used an image of Mike Tyson with a quote from Mike Tyson in one of his all hands. I did not see the all hands ahead of time. I would have obviously pulled it out and said, let's choose a quote from somebody who hasn't been convicted of rape and who hasn't assaulted people, right?
Yeah.
Right? So maybe,
I mean, even if you
Teresa.
like look at it from like the Evander Holyfield perspective, that's still not someone that anyone should really be modeling their professional career after.
Yes, he's like, but I liked the quote, and I said, it's not about you.
Find someone else that said it.
Yeah, communicate. Yeah, right. Communication is meant to connect. So you have not met your objective. So that's one way to address leaders, especially, and say, he goes, he's like, I've heard from a number of women in my team that wasn't an okay to do, and I want to understand more. And he came to me with that question. So I said what I just said. And then, and I also said, how would you feel about making an apology? And he's like, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good to do that. I'm happy to do that. And then we crafted something to follow. And I said, but you need to put action in here of what you're going to do differently. And I need you to do a follow-up in the next all hands or in the next email that you send out of the team to demonstrate this action, and how you're wanting to role model this for all people managers in your team, that these are the expectations of behaviors that you have amongst your team. So it has to translate into action. Otherwise, it's just going to be performative.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's huge, how people handle the stakes and how they handle failures and hardships and challenges tells you way more about that person than how they handle success or compliments or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I usually have this moment of kind of an internal, like, oh, that's who you might be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about this from, because we only have about 11 minutes left. I want to talk about this from the perspective of, somebody who's in a dominant social group. So generally, especially in America, white people are going to be seen as the dominant group in a lot of industries, a lot of organizations. So when it comes to, being in a situation and wanting to make sure that you are utilizing your privilege in a way that's helping other people, what should people know if they want to be allies, if they want to, to help with a situation where they're not the microaggressors, but they are either going to be kind of lumped in, or they basically just want to make sure that either these things don't continue or they are not seen as permissible?
Yeah, so it does depend on the political dynamics, of course. But if you and I are sitting in a room and you're constantly getting interrupted, one thing I can do in the middle is in real time say, hey, Joan, make up a name. Hey, Joan, Meg had an awesome idea. I want to hear her finish her thought and stuff, and I will happily go to you. So if I'm leading the meeting, especially, I have that responsibility to make sure everyone feels included, because all anyone wants is to be seen, heard, and valued. Yeah. Now, some people take that and go sideways where they dominate a room. Like they're so desperate for that attention that it comes out negatively, just like a 2-year-old. They may, draw on the walls because they're looking for attention. Even if it's negative attention, it's still attention. Yeah. So there's funny ways that we just kind of never grow out of, and we bring it into the meeting rooms. So the more we learn and are looking out now, if there's tests out there, there's quizzes, there's ways that we can find out what our inclusive mindset is. And if there's somebody never speaking, if there's somebody, and I'm talking about a Zoom room as well, not just a physical meeting room, but, so who is not speaking, and then I can, write over to them and say, hey, I want to make sure that you have a chance to speak, whether I'm the leader of the meeting or not. So there's ways that you can disrupt, the behavior that seems to be being let go or being allowed by, again, when I say to Joan, hey, Joan, I'm respecting her and I'm respecting you. So the advanced skill set that we're all going for is how can we be in certain awkward situations and still keep everybody's dignity intact?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay. And that takes practice. But if we can
huge amounts of practice being wrong and then practice making the change, like it's massive.
And if we come from that place of like, how do I keep everybody's dignity intact? and at the same time curb behavior that is actually counterproductive and cross purposes for the dignity of the person or the inclusivity of the team. What company value can you lean on and say, if integrity, I don't know, if inclusivity is one of your company values, and say, in the spirit of inclusion around here, I want to make sure that so-and-so has enough time to talk this through.
Yeah.
So you can always lean on your company values as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to recognize that no matter how you identify what your intersectionalities are, everyone is in a position of privilege in some way.
Yeah.
So even if your privilege is that you are able-bodied, or you are neurotypical, or you are, when it comes to like nursing is predominantly a female-dominated industry. And if there's male nurses in the room, they might not be very well heard or represented. But it's one of those things where if you can take a look at yourself and realize where your power, where your privilege or your influence lies, then you can say, you can use, like, I can use things like my whiteness and the fact that I'm highly unlikely to be dealt with in a public, especially like a retail situation, like someone may deal with an African-American person or a Black person or a brown person, pick anyone. And so I feel it's my responsibility to leverage that. My husband acts the same way. He works in a very, he works in manufacturing with a lot of blue collar workers who unfortunately feel that they can say a lot of things. And as a white cisgender male and very manly, masculine presenting, he gets a lot of that stuff said in his presence. And God love the man. My favorite thing to hear from him is, why did you think that's okay to say while I'm right here? Did you say that because you think I agree with you, or did you? Why would you say that? And you don't have to be like antagonistic about it. My mom calls it painting people into the nice corner. You say something like, I'm telling you, dude, Randy's a genius, but she calls it painting people into the nice corner. They say something, and in the moment where you're trying to figure out what to say, you can just go, I know you didn't mean to say, insert super sexist quote here, blah, 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 blah. Can you tell me what you meant by that? I know you didn't mean to come across that way. And you've given them an opportunity to walk back what they're saying. And if they don't, they are stepping squarely into jerk territory. But you don't have to know anything. You don't have to have a witty comeback. All you have to say is, I don't understand. Can you explain to me what you meant by that? Because I heard this and I don't think that's what you meant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's being generous, giving them the benefit of doubt,
absolutely.
Right.
But like, if you are in that position of power, flex it.
Yeah.
Flex it, because you are going to want someone to do the same when you are not in that position of power.
Yeah. Like, so in most corporate situations, I have a lot of power. It's old school situational leadership, right? Just because of the color of my skin. I also am 5'10", and I know I can assert my height. There's a bias about people with height. There's this wacky data point that talks about this. I want to say like 63% of CEOs are like 6 foot or taller. It's like this really big data point. Like, what does that doesn't make me smarter just because I was born with a body that has a long legs and I have Kermit arms, that has nothing to do with it. Right. But I know that it's a privilege of mine because there's a bias towards height, and I will use it to for the betterment of the team. I do not abuse it. Right. Just like my whiteness, I will use it, but I will not abuse it, and when I do abuse it, I want somebody to let me know that I did, right? Because it could be obviously detrimental, and that's never what I'm going for. And even though I'm a good, well-intentioned person, I can still mess up, and I will mess up because I have unconscious bias just like everybody else.
Oh yeah, of course.
There are marginalized identities that are not in power situations more often than other people. Now, being a gay woman, when the marriage equality thing was going on with all these LGBTQ plus bills that are in the legislation and stuff, so in this forum, or when I'm teaching my trainings, or, all of this kind of stuff, I'm coming across as the professional, the expert, or whatever. But all I have to do is walk into the next building where marriage equality or, some other LGBTQ plus situation is going on. Suddenly I'm second-class citizen, but I'm the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really understanding the situation and raising that awareness and asserting the power and leverage and offering education when I want to, I don't have to in every situation. Not everybody deserves my education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not everybody's worth spending the time on,
No.
You can't, there's the running joke of you can't fix stupid. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think you can't fix willful ignorance.
Willful ignorance. That you choosing not to know and to understand that other people are having a different experience than you are. We are in a communal, community-based mindset. This is the age that we're in. It's no longer about me and mine and ours who are exactly like me. Those days are gone. We are hospicing the old while we are giving birth to the new. Yeah. So it's got to be about other people. It's got to be what's best for us. Inclusive language, us, we, our, not me and mine. Those days are over. And again, there's a lot of people that haven't gotten that memo yet, but I encourage people to continue to have the resilience and to live that change that they want to see in the world, as Gandhi says.
Yep. I'm telling you, man, time is on our side for a lot of this. And in places where you're seeing this coming from, maybe not the boomer generation. I mean, we still got work to do. All of us have work to do.
Oh, there was a stat that was posted on LinkedIn today saying that because of the last 2 years during the pandemic, we actually slipped a generation backwards in progression for women in the workplace.
Oh, yeah. I'd 100% believe that.
And it's just unacceptable.
Yeah, it is. Okay, I hate wrapping us up quickly, but we are at time. Okay. Kim, you had shared a link with me. I'm going to keep sharing it in the chat here to where people can pre-order the book. Where else can people follow you and stay up to date on what you've got going on?
On LinkedIn, I also have, and I think you have the link for the LinkedIn profile. Please follow me, and you're going to see a lot of good information. I call people out, but I also do a lot of calling people in with my posts as well, but I'm not staying silent. So at least there's that. And then on Instagram, Conscious Communicators, and then on Twitter at Kim Clark and the number 1. I also have a LinkedIn group called the Conscious Communicators. So if you yourself, you're in marketing, you're in any kind of communication or content creation, anything like that, go to that group, and because we share a lot of examples and best practices of how to be inclusive in our language and representative in our visuals. Thanks, everybody. This was awesome. I really hope you got a lot out of it. I hope it makes a difference, because that was the point. So thank you, Meg, for the conversation.
Thank you, Kim. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Take care.